everyone, Chris and Daniel here with the Superhero Show. Now, this week, it kind of came out that Sony were flirting with the idea of bringing back Sam Raimi to act as a consultant, producer or director on a future Spider-Man movie, and it got us thinking about what makes a great superhero director, and has that changed over the years from the films that Tim Burton did in the early 90s to the Russo brothers, for instance, with what they did with the Winter Soldier. But for Chris, what makes a great superhero director for you?
What makes a great superhero director? Well, I was thinking about my favourite superhero movies, and what they've all got in common is directors with big visions and lots of visual flair. So Chris Nolan, Richard Donner, Tim Burton, Sam Raimi. And I think when you're talking about visions as well, like this summer, James Gunn, that's a guy who came in with a real voice and a real kind of quite out there, which he brought to Guardians of the Galaxy. It made it a really interesting and sufficiently kind of different superhero movie to kind of what we've got used to over the last few years, which is that there seemed to be a bit of a kind of real method to it, and it was following a similar formula, whereas he kind of mixed it up a little bit.
He was given an exciting new aspect to the universe to explore. Like he inject new cool stuff
and I
in.
say that he might have stuck to a similar template to all of them. I suppose he did, but he just made it weirder, and the characters said odder things, and visually it was a bit more fun, I think. I think
the last time that kind of happened before Guardians of the Galaxy was probably Kenneth Branagh on Thor, where you were given this slightly different aspect to the universe to explore, where you could, they had the Rainbow Bridge, and they had horses and spaceships all
But didn't
combining.
all he do just tilt his camera and shoot the whole film like that?
You got to love the Dutch angle.
That's not flair.
But I think the interesting thing, all the directors you name-checked initially, were Donner, Burton, Nolan. These are directors who are directors in their own right, have a vast body of work, have a distinctive style. Like, I think of Tim Burton's Batman as another incarnation of Batman. It is Tim Burton's Batman. You can look at it and just go, it's got Tim Burton's fingerprints all over it. And I wonder that's because this was slightly before superhero movies became all dominant and became these like monsters of Hollywood, where people were a bit cynical, like, are these stories for kids? And the way that you got them made was to get this really big director on board and hook people in by going, it's a Tim Burton film, or it's a Richard Donner film.
Yeah, but even Burton was a strange one at the time, because he'd done Pee-wee and Beetlejuice, and they were both kind of cult hits rather than huge hits, and he didn't have a vast body of work, but I guess you knew you were getting someone who was just going to do it his way, which was kind of a chance for the studio to take, but it worked out in that instance. Would you like to see Raimi return to Spider-Man?
I think he's made his movies. I think the world has changed. He did his love letter to the Steve Ditko Spider-Man that he grew up with, the comic book that he loved, and he impressed it with his own visual style. The scene that everyone name-checks is obviously the creation of Doc Ock. The scene where it's very Evil Dead, it's very Sam Raimi, it's crash zooms, it's got lots of visual flair,
and it's horror,
it's nightmarish, and it's kind of slightly hysterical as well. And he directed the hell out of those Spider-Man films. He really got what made that character. I remember in Spider-Man 2 there's a great scene where Spider-Man catches a car, and it really shows the strength of the character, and it recalls certain issues in the comic book. But I think the way that the superhero movies have gone, and you can see this maybe in the sorts of directors they're hiring. We talked a bit about this last week. We talked about Michelle McLaren. They're hiring TV directors more and more, and directors that maybe don't have a certain level of standing in Hollywood. And maybe it's because they're all... Not that they have to extinguish their style, but they have to make a film in a much bigger universe. They have to be more of a team player. Tim Burton couldn't come along and do Tim Burton's Batman if it's got a tie-in with the Justice League, for instance. You've got to have like an in-house style.
So do you think they're scared do you think they'd be scared of a Tim Burton in this day and age to direct one of the big...
I think they would, really, because I think it could derail the bigger plans. Because when you get someone like Tim Burton, who has a certain vision, even at the time, he'd only done 2 films, but he had such a strong style that you could basically derail the rest of your franchise and universe-building expectations.
And we are seeing at Marvel, on more than one occasion, directors leaving projects really late in the day, in the process.
Very notable one we've talked about a few times on the show is Edgar Wright, that everyone pinpoints. That is someone who has a strong visual style, obviously kind of funnily enough influenced by Raimi quite a lot, crash zooms and certain match cuts and all that sort of stuff, and he left Ant-Man, and we don't know the ins and outs of that, but the simplistic take would be maybe he wasn't willing to make certain compromises on the script or the direction of the movie. And maybe that's because Ant-Man has to get to this point and he has to be in this style because it's got to dovetail with the Avengers or whatever.
It must be tough. You're trying to make the best movie that you can, but you've got all these outside pressures telling you you've got to get this in, you've got to get that in, you've got to have a post-credit sting. You know, obviously Nolan was quite vocal about that recently, or he retracted his whatever was said, but it was interesting that I can't see Chris Nolan listening to all these people saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that.
And that's not why you hire Chris Nolan. You hire Chris Nolan because he knows what he's doing, and he has a certain vision and he pursues it dogmatically. But then also kind of actually what Christian Bale said when he's been doing press for Exodus recently, his Batman he created with Christopher Nolan, he said he doesn't belong to any other universe. And I think that's right. I couldn't, because there were some rumours that maybe Warners were offering Christian Bale a lot of money back in the day to be in the Justice League movie and Batman v Superman, but that character just doesn't gel because Nolan crafted a take on the character that was more real, that really couldn't exist in a world where the Green Lantern existed and Aquaman.
Yeah,
and I think there's some integrity to that, and I think it's interesting to have these multiple takes. And I think maybe we're going towards a more homogenized vision of these shared universes, which have their own strengths. Like, we're going to have everyone fighting Thanos in 8 years' time, which is going to be an amazing spectacle, likes of which Hollywood maybe has never produced. 10 films leading to one film.
Yeah.
But you do maybe sacrifice what, in comic book terms, like you call one-shots, or stories that exist outside of continuity, that give you a slightly different side of the character. Yeah.
Well, of the directors that have directed superhero movies in the past that you've liked, are there any of those that you'd want to see go back and do another one?
Funnily enough, I think the one that I would have wanted did it this year is Bryan Singer.
Yeah.
Bryan Singer did a phenomenal job on X-Men 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then 3 in his departure. Obviously, Matthew Vaughn was associated with it, dropped out at the 11th hour. Brett Ratner, didn't do a great job. That was, the film was a bit all over the place. And you always thought, what if Bryan Singer had stayed on to do The Last Stand? What could he have done with the Dark Phoenix stuff he'd been building over 2 films?
Yeah.
And then I think when he came back this year, he showed that he knows something about those characters. I think above all, what you look for in a director is someone who understands those characters. When I spoke to the Russo brothers, they are huge Marvel nerds. They know Captain America, they know S.H.I.E.L.D., they grew up reading Steranko comics. They know what makes that world interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you look forward to.
And you get a feeling that they're going to direct a bunch of Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Won't they?
I think they're embedded,
in the same way that from here on in, if Joss Whedon wants to direct one, he'll get to. It's his choice now, I think, because I think they find partnerships and they go with them. And
I think it's also like the kind of copying what the comic books industry has done for a while. You have a pool of writers that maybe you can move around, and hey, they did a really great 2-movie run on Winter Soldier. Captain America's established now. Why don't we move them onto, they're not going to do that, but like Black Panther or the next Captain Marvel?
Yeah.
They did a really good job with that. Let's move them over and see what they do. And you might start following certain directors around the Marvel universe, which is interesting, and it's more of a comic book thing.
When are we going to have a director do a Marvel movie and then do a DC movie? That's what I want to see.
That's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to jump ship.
What a coup that would be as well if they get one of the big ones.
Happened in comics. People flip-flop back and forth and do some of their best work at both houses.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be interesting. I'm sure someone will be poached in the next 10 years for one of these projects.
Let's make it happen. Let's start the campaign here.
Okay.
John Favreau. Let's have John Favreau doing a DC movie.
Yeah.
Done.
There you go.
I know in a show that I wasn't on where you were talking about superhero directors, you picked out the person you'd most like to see do one as Paul Greengrass.
Yeah, I think so. I think he was my pick.
I've been having a think today. Alfonso Cuarón's the one I'd like to see do it. I just like the fact that every time he comes to the table, it's something new, different, visionary. He's brilliant with effects, but he'll just do something that you're not expecting.
Any character in mind? Green Lantern? He's got Space Down.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Maybe he could nail...
Just all set in space.
Although he said I spoke to him and he said he had a miserable time, like, trying to shoot that movie. Yeah, it was such... It's
only 90 minutes. Imagine if he was doing like... Yeah,
that was such hard work. But yeah, he's my shout.
Awesome. Should we ask for some feedback?
Let's do that.
Yeah. So if you want to write in and tell us which director you most like to return to superhero movies, is the director that you would like to see take on a particular project, you can write in at any time using what catchy email address now?
It's superheroshow@ign.com.
Yeah, and until next week, for all of your superhero needs, stay right here on IGN.